Hello, I'm Al Fry, and in the following presentation, we're going to explore further into some history that you've probably never heard. And if you're a seeker of the truth, remember, this series will examine and clarify many of the mysteries of our planet on a wide range of subjects. A confirmation of many of the concepts presented here will be found in many lesser-known books and manuscripts. Mankind has always feared the things that were beyond its understanding. Accepted history shows only crude facts, and fully demonstrable and explainable through archaeological findings. The destroyed walls of a city, for example, can corroborate the reality of some ancient battle, or a marble statue of an old ruler proves the fact that he actually existed at some time. Yet it seems that everything that bears the slightest touch of mystery is immediately classified as legend, a product of human imagination. And there's even a modern trend to ascribe these legends to some psychological problems, which are supposed to be solved this way by primitive human minds. It's interesting to notice that nobody has still tried to discover what type of psychic disturbance is being solved in our time by denying the possibility of the so-called legends being actual descriptions of facts that happened, but they're not fully understood by the humans who observed them, and still less by modern historians. And for example, there are many things in the Old Testament that are classified as religious or mystical experiences which must, at best, be considered metaphysical or metaphorical, or as having some obscure symbolism. Greek mythology is interpreted as the invention of supernatural figures, endowed with powers ordinary humans always wish to possess, and thus becoming sublimations, archetypes, wish fulfillments, and so on and so forth. And it seems that nobody today in his sound reason would even entertain even the slightest idea that there might be something or somebody on the top of Olympus besides frequent clouds and mists. The Middle Ages are also full of things our modern history would be happy to make everybody forget, being unable to do so completely, just because they're closely linked to many understandable and undeniable historical facts, and they keep appearing in the writings of important philosophers who cannot all be erased from the textbooks. There are many references, for example, to witchcraft during the Middle Ages, as well to as extraordinary feats supposedly performed by witches and sorcerers. For example, they were supposed to have been seen flying on brooms, which are not precisely very suitable artifacts for flying. The alchemists, to whom our modern chemistry owes so many of its first breakthroughs, are classified as charlatans when they state that they found the philosopher's stone and succeeded in making gold from lead. Most of these things are explained away as products of daydreaming and fraud and big talk in order to scare primitive, uncultured minds. And still, our modern, objective, and mystery-destroying history fails to explain several interesting facts, leaving them in the realm of questions that cultured people should not be asking just because other cultured people are unable to answer them. For example, where did all the goldware found in India, China, and other countries of the Orient come from? India and China are not among gold-producing countries. Nobody has ever found the mines where all the gold of the Maharajas and Mandarins came from. And the same could be said about the Indians before the discovery of America. Aztec, Incas, and other cultures used gold for almost everything, but nobody ever tells anything about the methods of gold mining employed by them. When the Spanish conquerors arrived, The places where there was actually gold in America was still untouched and contained all the gold Europe might wish to mine, while these mines should have been exhausted if all the gold used by the Indians had been taken out of them. Probably one of the most interesting cases of unexplained historical facts can be found in the Old Testament, with King Solomon as the protagonist. Israel could not be considered as a rich country when Solomon became its ruler. David had left it as a state of shepherds who owned very little, if anything, outside their herds, and then all of a sudden this little country became the most magnificent, rich, and powerful kingdom that's ever been known on earth, according to the records. Gold in an immense quantity was used to cover the famous temple and the palaces. The most powerful kings considered a great honor to be able to visit Solomon and see his face and listen to his wisdom, all being surprised when they saw his wealth, which was far greater than anything that they were able to imagine. The Old Testament states that silver was not considered as precious under Solomon's rule, and that he practically paved Jerusalem with silver like cobblestones. Well, how did all this wealth appear so suddenly? Where did all this gold come from? The legend says that Solomon had mines in Central Africa, but with the means of transportation used in those times, his lifetime would not be enough to bring so much gold from so far. Well, King Solomon himself was a mysterious figure in history. Legends repeated over in a low voice during the Middle Ages mentions powerful things about him, wonderful things, but they must not be spoken out loud, or the Holy Inquisitor might hear them. His ring was supposed to have a great power. Well, making its bearer more powerful than all the kings on earth put together. It was even whispered and assumed in some old manuscripts that he had some treaty with demons who worshipped and obeyed him. Despite all this power and glory, his tomb has never been found by archaeologists. And here the Old Testament makes a strange reference, which could indicate that somebody has torn some pages out of history somewhere. In one place it's mentioned that whatever Solomon did is carefully described in the book Solomon's Deeds. And where are all these books? Well, the best we can get from our historians is a shrug. Nobody's ever read them and been able to recount that he found in their pages. And did they tell us things the human mind was not prepared to understand and therefore referred to destroy? And who destroyed them? Or would some holiness suffer if these books were included in the Bibles? Well, we'll never know. Just quite who and by what right they decided to proclaim themselves judge of the one who was the greatest of all men, denying the future generations the right to know the truth about the past of mankind. Well, one thing remains clearly visible. Our knowledge about our planet is not complete. Pages and even whole volumes have been torn out of history. But is it possible to erase whole chapters of events so as not to leave the slightest hint of what actually happened? Well, mankind is composed of many different cultures, and if one has destroyed an unwanted evidence somewhere in some other place, a different culture may have reconstructed or recorded in writing or in memory some of the more outstanding facts regarding those times and events. Well, somewhere there has to be some book mentioning what has been kept from our eyes, and such a book does exist. And it comes from the mysterious Orient, where people are not afraid to talk about things that they've witnessed, but fail to understand, limiting themselves to describe what they saw in terms in which their own minds allowed them to interpret the evidence. Well, the title of the book, of course, that we're talking about is The 1001 Nights. And this book has always been considered in the Western countries as simple fairy tales. not worth really thinking about seriously. And yet what the West has seen has usually been abbreviated translations, where much of the original text has been excluded, and sometimes something very quite different when one reads a full and unabridged version of this unusual book. References have been made that the full version is rather unprintable according to Western standards, and this is true in a way. The book cannot be considered as immoral. It just belongs to a different culture. It was written by a people who are not ashamed of their bodies with all their organs and functions. Of course, this can be a little shocking for a member of society where the human body is considered as something indecent, unless it's covered with clothes, which of course very often make it only still more indecent. But when the translations are made, many detailed descriptions of great interest are lost at the same time as some too spicy expressions also. And there are stories that would be a little hard for Christians to read, that whoever wants to really can penetrate into the marvelous world of the 1001 Nights. And if you want to read the true, unabridged history of that period, then get the full version of it. And just what kinds of stories does this book contain? How old are they? Well, the author of this book, Scheherazade, is first mentioned in the Indian book Katha Sarit Sagara, dating from the 10th century of the Christian era. So it's logical to accept that it was written approximately at that time. Most of the stories belong to the Islamic era, but they can be adaptations from older ones. There's at least one story which is masterfully pre-Islamic. Also, there are stories, though very few, that have been added later, dealing with Tamerlane, who lived during the years 1336 to 1405 A.D., and other obviously invented things, opium dreams and such. But the immense majority of the stories are truthful narrations of historical events, be they wars, things that happen to known persons from the Islamic history, or just descriptions made by travelers of their adventures. There are also special tales to illustrate the Islamic doctrine and philosophy, as well as just plain anecdotes and the hashish dreams, which can easily be differentiated from the former ones. The book itself is of Indian origin, yet belongs to the Muslims established in India. With the only exceptions of obviously invented stories, the descriptions are very accurate, even though the narrator did not always understand what he'd seen, limiting self to express in terms of understandable for him what was beyond his usual everyday experience. So, for instance, there were descriptions of things which Arabs, or at least the Arabs from cities, did not know, but which result in quite familiar sorts for a modern reader, particularly the one who's visited different countries. And if some descriptions of what is presented as something unusual are true, then there's no reason for believing that other things in the same story have to be simple inventions. Historians that go back to this period observe that authors of these stories had actual very little imagination, if any at all. They just narrated things as they happened, without